Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Intentional Success webinar. This one we're calling Viewer's Choice. This is Ask Tom Anything. So these are business questions. I'll answer technology questions if I can, but you may not like my technology answers. But lots of business questions, bring them my way. I've got a nice set of questions that folks have sent me in advance. So I look forward to getting to those, and then anything else that you have on your mind. I'm here for you. Let's have some fun. Now, for those of you who don't know me, if you're new to this, I'm Tom Stimson. I'm founder and president of Stimson Group. Here are all the places that you can find me. Please visit my website, check out Facebook group, shoot me an email, set up an intro call. Happy to talk with anybody. As long as we're talking about the business of AV, I'm your guy. I'd love to talk about this stuff. I do have to pause quickly to thank some sponsors. These are the folks who sponsor Jumpstart Workshops, which we just finished one up last week, which I'll talk about in just a minute. And they make this possible. Their funding allows us to do way more fun stuff than we could do otherwise. And we eat better food, we drink a little bit better, we have a fancier ballroom, and we get to have some fun. And thanks to all of them. And on top of all that, they're great friends, and they're helping all of my clients out with their businesses. So pay attention to these names because you will see them again. These are great folks. Now, why this particular webinar? Usually when I put a webinar together, I have a goal in mind. There's something I'm trying to accomplish. And honestly, the goal of this webinar is I need a break. We just finished the Jumpstart Workshop for Management last week. We had a great turnout. We had 75 attendees. Plus our sponsor attendees, plus our staff. So we had about 90 people in the room. Great turnout, very, very successful, lots of good feedback. That's part of what makes all of this worthwhile is getting to interact with so many people. I think we had 35 different companies represented in the attendees. Some folks brought as many as 7 and 8 folks from their companies. A few folks came by themselves and realized they should have brought someone else. But that's a lot of work to put up. I do one a quarter, and that's a lot of stuff to get in advance. So if I don't have to prepare a webinar, that helps. And the good news is that I answer questions for a living, so this webinar is tailor-made for what I do. Now, if you have a question that interests you, please post it in the Q&A box, and we will get to that. Now, here's a question that was sent to me by email in advance, so thank you for the people who did that. This is a long one, but I'll go ahead and read it because I think the inflection is important. My question is related to your Wearing Too Many Hats session, which was a webinar many of you are familiar with. Any tips on solving the problem of too many people wearing the same hat? We tend to treat every employee that knows how the gear turns on as capable of putting together a quote, and any person that doesn't pick their nose in front of the people as a client-facing event manager. There's a reason I don't put your names on these. Rather than keeping people in their key roles, the first available person takes on the task, which greatly reduces our efficiency. That's an opinion, but we can quantify that. So here's his question. Am I better suggesting we keep people in their lane, or silos as he calls them, or pushing for tighter control of processes for efficiencies through a common workflow? Whew, okay, that's a big question, but let me tell you, this is something that I've run into on many occasions. And in particular with a couple of clients that I've helped reorganize over the years, where everybody is everything. And they want everybody to be a jack of all trades. They want maximum flexibility, which if somebody needs to write a quote, if you're available, you write the quote. If you need to work on a show, if you're available, you go on the show. It looks great. It looks like we're just like super efficient and we're highly flexible and highly scalable. But in fact, when you go back and you actually do the analysis, it's exactly the opposite. So this is one of those things that seems like common sense. It seems like, gosh, we've figured out the secret to doing all this. We just hire people who can do everything. But it ends up with you have people who are making $50 an hour doing $15 an hour work, which, let's face it, that's pretty darn inefficient. So there's a false economy here. So here's a couple of notes I scrambled together. What I call this is gig mentality. Gig mentality is that all business is a show. We treat our business like we're doing a show or doing an event, doing a gig, rather than having a business mindset. And again, this is the false economy of this free-form way of getting things done. It's chaos. And let's face it, if we did this on show site, the show would be chaos. If everybody on show site could do anybody's job and simply gravitated to whatever the fire of the moment was, I mean, we wouldn't get anything done. There's no focus. There's no, there's no continuity and getting the right outcomes per discipline. So this kind of mentality is very, very, very dangerous. In 100% of the cases that I have worked with, these companies make far less money than their counterparts who are more focused and organized. Far less money. The long and the short of it is these companies have too many employees. And I can prove it. They are doing fewer gigs, and when they run out of employees, they stop taking on work. They're not scalable. They're the opposite of scalable. So the issue that we're dealing with here is the issue of best use versus best at. We want to discover the best use for people. We want to centralize best use activities. And our best at people, we want them available so they can be tapped into to share a little bit of best at. Everybody needs a primary hat. Everybody needs a first job that they cannot say no to. We need a person who's doing logistics. It's an anchor position back at the shop. They have to schedule trucks, they have to schedule travel, they have to schedule crew. These things go on all the time. They're trying to maximize utilization of resources, just like you would do with equipment. That's a best use of a process. Somebody needs to man that all the time so that it's done as equitably and as wisely as it can possibly be done. We want to use best use in our bookkeeping practices. I don't want anybody to do bookkeeping. I want the person who knows how to do bookkeeping, but that doesn't mean that they have to be the best person at doing bookkeeping. Best at people are often behind these kinds of business models because they feel that if they're great at everything and they know how to do everything, that everybody else should as well. And the fact that they could jump into any position or role, they can jump behind the lighting console or the video call cameras or, tweak an LED wall. They think that everybody needs to follow that same model and develop into the perfect, all-around individual. The problem with that is that, $50 an hour person doing $15 an hour work, and we don't get the economies of scale. We don't get the business model that generates recurring free cash and income. So yes, the answer to your question is, definitely you need to be pushing for tighter control of processes. You need a common workflow that everybody follows, but you need repeatable activities done by the same individual or individuals so that the recurring processes are consistent, that we don't have to worry about them. They are reliable, which frees up people to deal with the things that are unreliable, like dealing with clients, dealing with the challenges of weather and travel and, equipment breaking down and all the other stuff that we deal with when we're doing shows. So centralize people that as best you can. And I've worked with companies where we had 0 people who were centralized, going to over 50%, even 75% of the staff in centralized positions, and reducing the number of people who are jack of all trades can go into any position and relying more on outsourcing. And outsourcing is always more scalable. So I have very deep opinions about this, but I will tie it all back to business. Show me your P&L, and I'll show you where this mindset is getting you, and then demonstrate to you what the potential of your organization actually is. So it's a great question. It's a big question. Big question. But if you feel like you have this kind of challenge in your business, I'm probably the right person to talk to. So thanks for that question there. See, I'm having fun already. Hope you are. All right, next question that was sent to me. How do you handle large accounts from retiring sales reps? We have historically assigned them to an account manager at a reduced commission rate. Other peers I've spoken to have simply reassigned to another sales rep at full commission. What do you suggest? Well, this sounds like a real simple question, but it's an important one because it speaks to I think some confusion we have in our industry about what commissions are supposed to do and what's the value of new business versus retained business. So I end up having a lot of conversations with owners about, okay, how do I commission the person who brought in the new business versus, the person who's going to handle it next year, that sort of thing. And realizing that these are two very different things. So in sales, we have three focuses. We have new business that we're trying to get through outreach, through marketing, through business development, through just answering the phone better, making sure that our salespeople or our account managers have time to properly handle and onboard a new prospect. All of these are things that we do to help new business happen. We have retained business that we've already invested in. We've done all the work of acquiring them, but it still requires work to retain them, because if we lose them, we have to go back and find another piece of new business, which is hard work. So retained work, any effort that leads to retaining business is a better investment even than new business. Transactional business, and sometimes we call these house accounts, the people who are going to buy from you no matter what, no matter who answers the phone, they're going to buy from you. There's often not even much of a negotiation. It's a box sale, a box rental, a simple recurring job. This is transactional business. So let's think about the value of these three things and what we're trying to enforce, what we're trying to make happen. Now, if a salesperson is retiring, what they have is retained business, and this business is now at risk. So this is a huge red flag. I would say there's probably a 50% chance, even though most customers don't do business with a salesperson, they do business with a company, in spite of what salespeople think, there is still a 50% chance that when that salesperson retires or leaves the company, that customer may find the opportunity or the reason to change. And how well we handle that transition will greatly affect whether or not they choose to stay on or go look somewhere else. So retaining customers during transition is really, really important. So the last thing I would want to do is devalue that customer for an account manager, saying, here's a new account, but oh, by the way, it doesn't pay you as much money as the other accounts you already have because, well, you didn't win it, somebody else won it. This is the wrong conversation. The value in winning a client is a business expense. It's not a sales expense. Okay, salespeople put in effort so that they can get an account that they can earn commission on, and we shouldn't minimize the value of that commission based on who scored the account, because it's retaining the account is where the value actually is. So I don't like to mess with salespeople's commission. If I put work in their plate, even if I hire a new salesperson, you've all heard me say this, I bring a new salesperson on, the first thing I'm going to do is go to my other salespeople, find transactional accounts that I can take off of their plate and give to the new person so that they have some work to do. They'll learn their job more quickly, they'll learn your system more quickly, and they will be more attractive to new customers that they encounter because they already have customers. There's nothing that deflates a sales call that, well, I don't have any customers yet, but I'd like to have you as a customer. No, you need to have some customers. We need to make these people successful as quickly as possible. I'd probably give them up to 50% of their capacity in house accounts or other business that can be moved from my existing salespeople, and then let those salespeople develop new business that's coming in through this business development or sales pipeline, because they will be better at onboarding new customers. Once we have business, you make commission. Doesn't matter how it came by. So that's a long topic that I could talk about for much, much longer. But my suggestion is, on this particular question is, don't reduce anybody's commission rate. Pay them, and pay them handsomely to retain that account. All right. Next question. Thank you. If you guys have just joined the call, the Q&A box click on that icon and type in some questions there for me, and I will get to your questions. I've got a couple more of these that were sent to me in advance, and then we're going to start going to the Q&A box. So thank you guys for joining us today. All right, the next question we have. I can always tell when there was somebody who was recently at a workshop, because they're talking about business stages. It's beta 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 are the business stages that I talk about at Jumpstart workshops. So this follower says, we are focused on becoming a 2.0 company in 2020, but we are stuck on what metrics to follow. What's different for 2.0? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about business metrics and KPIs. And for those of you who are not familiar with my system, a beta company is effectively a startup. They are evolving. They're identifying processes that they're going to document later. They're doing their best just to keep the business moving, generate some cash, get a little bit farther down the road so that they have regular income, and then start developing 1.0 systems and 1.0 companies. Start to define processes, start to look at their business metrics, start to think about, cost of goods sold or gross profit on a job cost basis, investing in equipment, long-term growth and viability. 2.0 is a more sophisticated version of that. They start to introduce things like budgets, and 3.0 companies have all the business mindset under control. They know how to run a business. And they know how to do strategy, they know how to do planning, which means that they have a lot of control over trajectory. They can go where they want to go. They can develop the kind of business or lines of business or the markets or the customer bases that they want to develop, and choose where they want to go and how they want to get there. So we'd all like to be a 3.0 company, but we have to develop all the skills along the way. So in the question about 2.0 metrics, let me first go back to 1.0. A 1.0 company will generally track metrics in owner or general manager terms. In other words, it's one person or a management team looking over the entire organization. So it's a lot of focus on, revenue numbers, gross profit percentages, maybe a few individual costs of goods sold that they need to track, and then the overall expenses, or which you might call overhead, you might call SG&A, but in general, those are the expenses. It's the rent, it's the a lot of your staff will fall under those expenses, your cell phone bill, general office supplies, all those things fall under expenses, insurance. So they will track those big buckets of things and maybe focus on a few individual items like, sub-rentals or outside labor, that sort of thing. Now in 2.0, while we continue to track the 1.0 metrics, and we might actually drill down a little bit more into them, in 2.0 we add manager metrics. So we go down one layer in management and create the metrics of those individuals. So if I have a warehouse manager, they're managing a department, a team of people, I'm going to give them a few key performance indicators that they need to monitor as well. I may look at individual contributions. I may have salespeople or technicians or some other person in the organization who is basically flying solo, therefore what they produce can be attributed to them. So I start looking at that more closely. And then I also start looking at project metrics. Project metrics are hard because we often conflate the performance of a project with the performance of the company, and in fact, they're two different things. So job costing becomes very important in 2.0, but we can't confuse job costing with the P&L statement. So a job cost has no overhead expenses assigned to it, which is a great point of contention between me and, well, most CPAs and controllers. But trust me on this, I am right. Job costs are incremental income. I can show you how to make that work, but that's what we're going to look at in 2.0. And then the other thing that we're going to add in 2.0, and this is a biggie, are budget comparisons, because a 2.0 company creates fiscal budgets. So they will, for 2020, we're at the end of November, so they should already have their 2020 budget in place. And that means that they have budgeted revenue, budgeted cost of goods sold, and budgeted expenses for the year. Now, we all know that the budget won't stick because as soon as January happens, January is not going to be as budgeted, but that's going to affect the budget again for the rest of the year. So adding that sophistication of working with budgets is a 2.0 quality. And we start comparing our performance to budgets. And that sounds very familiar. I think I've got another question in here about budgets, or maybe I answered it earlier today. So we're going to focus on budgets so that we can get better at budgeting. So how do we get employees to embrace budgeting? I know I've got a slide on that. We'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. So that's the difference between 1.0 and 2.0. 3.0 companies have KPIs and dashboards all over the place. They look at fewer numbers because they know exactly what numbers they need to look at. They spend less time discovering how numbers work, and more times they spend more energy on learning from the numbers and making change and using numbers to drive change. So it's a very different experience when you get to 3.0. So great question. I'm glad you are looking at 2.0 processes. Make sure you get all your 1.0 stuff done first. Don't leave any boxes unticked. Okay, next question. How do we get employees to embrace change?
Here's what I found.
I don't know. How do we get employees to embrace change? We are changing things all across our operation, and we keep running into pockets of resistance and low morale. Okay, this is not unfamiliar. I'm kind of in the change business, so we hear about this all the time. So I think there are basically three things that you need to focus on when you're trying to drive change. Particularly with employees, but in general, when you're trying to drive change, the first one is actually the hardest. I have this conversation very often with my clients, with owners. Sooner or later, you have to stand up in front of the team and tell them this is not negotiable. You have to say, here's where we're going. You have to make your vision very, very clear. You have to draw a line in the sand. We are going to grow the business, which means that things are going to have to change. A lot of the stuff we do won't work at the volumes that we're looking at doing. And you say, this is not negotiable. We're not going backwards. This step is extremely important. If you don't do that, then everything is a negotiation. So this is, guys, we're going to do this. Number two is that whenever you can, involve everybody who's affected in the process. And that may sound exhausting for you, but it's a lot less trouble than having to deal with the pockets of dissent and the unexplained low morale that happens during change process. So the more they can see how the sausage is made and how the compromises are made, it's very, very important that they see all that so that they can buy in. The process of change is a lot of compromises, and people need to see that in compromise. Good compromises means everybody's just a little bit disappointed, but they're all very hopeful that where we ended up is where we need to be and what we can all do and all accomplish. So involve them in the process. And then there's always going to be differences, and just acknowledge them. A lot of times these differences are just like in sales. It's a single level objection. When the person says, well, I still think this is frustrating. I still think this is hard. And sometimes you just have to say, I agree, it is hard. But then you go back and say, but it's not optional. So we're going to do it. Now, the elephant in the room, and I can't move on without saying it, is that some people are not cut out for change. I get hired, I get engaged with companies usually because they've stagnated. Change is not coming as easily as it should, or maybe it's coming too fast. The company has plateaued typically. And what I will find is this is an organization that has made accommodations for the key personnel. They're often longtime employees who resist change. And change makes them uncomfortable. They don't want to change the status quo. They like the way they're doing things. And they've been with them a long time. And so we keep working around that. And that limits the ability of the company to grow, evolve, make more money, do better things. Identify the people who aren't cut out for change and sit down and have an honest conversation with them that says, look, I'm getting the sense that you're not cut out for change. go back to number one. We are going to change. I want you involved in the process. Okay? And I know that you're not going to agree with everything. Now, are you ready to move forward or not? Not everybody's going to move forward. That's okay. Yeah, Bill, you're absolutely right. Yeah, these people are the bottlenecks. My old buddy Gary had a phrase or a term for these people. They were called obstacleists. Obstacleists are the people who carry the obstacles that are going to keep you from moving forward. They're the ones that introduce the things, the boulders that cannot be moved, and they stand on them and say, no, well, we can't do that because of X. We've got to break those boulders. We got to break those obstacles as much as possible. Okay. Next question. Oh, woohoo. As an owner, I struggle with trusting others to get things done. I worry about our quality and attention to detail. If I'm not involved, then who monitors this? You're in a really good club. This is what keeps owners up at night. So this is a great question. My answer, my answer on being able to move on, as I always tell owners, that you have to learn how to trust and delegate. If you can't trust or delegate, then you're going to be ruled by fear. So our challenge here is that we want to reduce how often fear affects our decisions. It's okay to be afraid. Bravery is not the absence of fear. Bravery is what we do in spite of being afraid. So we've got to find the bravery that allows us to move forward. So if you can't trust or you can't delegate or both, let's study the fear that's causing you to do that and see what we can do to reduce that fear. Now, one way we can reduce the fear of trust and delegation is, instead of trying to trust everyone, trust one person. Trust one person that you can delegate trust to and say, I trust you to manage this area of my business. Okay, so if we can find some small piece that we can cut out and then move on to another area and try and develop the manager or the leader that we're going to trust in that area. So reduce the number of people you need to trust by delegating trust. Hopefully you can get to the point as your company grows where you have a handful of key managers that you've delegated to that you trust implicitly. The other thing that I find that owners in this situation need to do a better job, and I sound like a broken record here, is you need to make sure that your visions, your goals for the business, and your brand priorities are clear. Tell everybody where you want to go and say it as many times as it takes for them to finish your sentences. Tell them where you want to go. Tell them how you want to get there, what your vision is, who you want to be along the way, and then what do you want to look like? What do you want people to think or feel when they experience your brand? If you can reiterate those three things over and over and over again and get people to nod at the right times and understand that, and then when things don't turn out the way that you want them to, tie it back to those three things. Say, hey, here's an outcome we had. Let me tell you why it doesn't meet my vision and where it got away from my brand priorities. And I said but what I really mean is our. So help people understand that they are also part of this, that these have to be their priorities too. So those three things. So we got our vision clear, brand priorities clear, and then we got to put the right people in place. And having the right people in place that you can trust and delegate is expensive. If you haven't done it, the reason you haven't done it is because it costs more money than what you have now. So for many of the owners that I deal with, the folks that they're not trusting or delegating to right now have simply evolved into the position. Maybe the position has evolved past their capabilities, which we call that the Peter principle. And we don't have the right person in place, and so therefore I can't trust them. So put the right people in place. It will pay off. And yes, they're going to cost more money, but right now you're subsidizing your bottom line by not being able to grow your business, not being able to have control of your life, not being able to sleep at night because you don't know what your team's going to do or you don't trust what they're going to do. So there's an outcome, there's a solution to this. It starts by identifying what your fears are and then taking the right steps to alleviate that fear and do it consistently. Um, having said all that, to the person who wrote this question, I feel your pain, because this is the hardest part of any owner's quest, is to figure out how to overcome that fear and learn how to trust and delegate. Next question. Can you explain the difference between what a general manager does and what the owner should be doing? Well, I can try. Let me reframe this. I'm gonna distinguish between what a CEO does and what a general manager does. A CEO, which is in my clientele, is often the owner of the company. It's the principal shareholder, or the representative, or the principal of the shareholders who runs the company. When you're wearing your CEO hat, you don't have CEO stuff to do every day. There's not a CEO checklist that every morning a CEO does these 5 things. A CEO's job is to make sure that the vision of the company is clear. And if that means restating it every morning, then that's the CEO's job. That you have the right people, that we've provided the means and the access to get the right people into the organization, which is often removing obstacles, and that we have the money to do it with. And by money, I mean specifically cash. So if a CEO can give us the direction that we're going in, provide the right kind of people, and give us the cash to make the investments that we need to make, whether it's buying new equipment or simply paying rent or making payroll, these are of utmost importance. You don't have to be deeply involved in these things every single day. These are things that you just generally have to do. Now, a general manager, while a CEO is strategic, a general manager's job is to execute strategy, which is a lot of focusing on tactical outcomes. So GMs are very, very tactical. They need to have the strategic conversation. They need to understand where they're going, but then they need to tactically execute to a specific outcome, whether it's a profitability, it's growth, some other result that can be defined. In a small business, like most of you, a CEO might sometimes work for the general manager. So if I have a CEO who's also a salesperson in the system, and you have other salespeople in your system, when the CEO is being a salesperson, they work for the sales manager or the general manager, or whoever's in charge of salespeople. They should, in theory, follow the same processes. Very often, I find that owners don't think any of the processes apply to them, but they get really wound up if other people don't follow them. Understand that you have 2 roles, and one is being the CEO and the owner, and the other one is being a person who's integral to the overall company process, and follow that job. So a CEO has to be able to change hats. A GM's hat doesn't change very much. Their focus may change, who they're talking to might change. They may drill down in different parts of the business if we're not getting the tactical outcomes or the results that we're looking for. But at all times, we're making sure that everything we're doing ties back to executing the strategy, again, that was defined by the CEO. So I hope that makes sense. It's a little convoluted in some cases, but I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. CEO's job is really quite simple and small, but you're not a CEO very much of your day. Most of the day, you're doing something tactical, in which case you're following somebody else's process. If you're the CEO and GM, then you need to spend less time doing tactical things. I can't afford for you to be a production manager or an accountant or a salesperson. Okay. Here's the budgets thing. How do you implement budgets and get people to follow them? That's a question my wife probably often asks in her head. We try to create budgets, but since we never come close to reality, people just blow them off. Okay, so budgets are nebulous. Budgets are a difficult concept for some people because it's not the real money. And since you never actually meet your budget, either you're going to exceed it or come in under it, why did you budget in the first place? Because business, whatever outcomes happen are the outcomes that happen. Budgets don't seem to change anything, which just means that they weren't properly implemented. So let's talk about how you make budgets work. Now, one of the things a 1.0 company is going to do, on its way journey to a 2.0 company is start to understand and make budgets work and put budgets in more and more budgeting into their system. When you're communicating with employees about budgets, growing up, my dad was a fantastic budgeter. He had all these ledgers and everything, and he budgeted every paycheck, and amounts, dollars went into every account and into envelopes, for things. Here's the grocery budget. Here's the new clothes budget. Here's the utilities budget. And then unspent money would get carried forward to the next month. And my mother used to complain is that we didn't always have money to buy groceries, but we could go out and buy new clothes. On one hand, I thought, hey, that's great because I understood that and my siblings didn't. So I always got money to go buy new school clothes. But you have to make your team understand budgets, because in my family, budgets were a bad word. So to make budgets work, focus on cash instead of profit. The reason we budget is not to make sure that we make the profit at the end of the year. At least that's not how I want my employees to understand it, because they have no benefit from that, or very little benefit from that, unless there's some sort of profit sharing. The purpose of budgeting is to make sure that I have cash when I need cash. If your slow month is July and that's when you want to do a lot of projects, budgeting is what gives you the cash to do those projects in July, even though you're not making any money in July. So that's the value of budgeting. So help them understand that that's why we budget, because it's going to free up the cash so that we can do the things that we need to do when it's time to do them. To make budgets work, you have to get into the habit of turning down unbudgeted requests. Now, at the beginning, there's going to be a ton of them, and that's going to be hard to turn everything down. But as you become more entrenched in budgeting, you can say, look, that's a great idea. We didn't put it in the budget. And right now, I don't have anything I want to take out of the budget. But let's move it down. Let's put it on the table for a few months from now and see what we can do. And we can certainly put it in for next year. When you review your results, you do those financial reviews, compare everything to budget. Always compare it to budget. And sometimes you're going to be so wildly off budget, it's going to be comical. But the purpose of doing it is to ask the question why, so that you can get better at budgeting. So it's not that the budget was wrong, it's the people who built the budget need to get better at budgeting. So use as anomalies to learn and figure out how things actually work, because sometimes our budgeting process is illogical. For instance, if I say I'm going to grow my business 5% next year, so I just add 5% to all my revenue numbers for every month, and then thinking that's going to increase my cost of goods sold proportionally, I'm going to have a horrible budget, because I don't actually understand the relationships between these things. And then when you have adverse results, in other words, you budgeted $1 million a month and you only had a $500,000 a month, that needs to affect discretionary spending. Some of the things that you planned on doing are going to have to be set aside. Maybe not just in this month and next month, but maybe over the rest of the year. So we have to recast the budget to make up for the shortfall, which means some of the things that we thought we would have money for, we're not going to have money for. And you have to connect those things and make sure that we're having that conversation. And likewise, if we come back and we have $1.5 million a month when we expected $1 million a month, if our whole year's going like that, then we're creating money to do things. But a lot of that money is going to get invested back into growth, into new employees who weren't part of the budget because your business is growing. Again, everybody needs to see how those things are all connected. So that's how you make budgets work, and you get buy-in. You have to provide a lot of transparency to help people understand how it all works. And I think I've got one more question, and then I'm going to go to the questions you guys have typed in. So here's the last pre-sent question. I'm the owner, and I'm the owner. Oh, same question, different problem. Maybe it's the same person. I'm the owner, and we are growing, but I project manage my events. The clients expect me to be closely involved. How do I pass this work on to others without losing customers? All right. That's an important question. You're moving in the right direction. Let's get you off a show site. Here's how we get an owner out of the field. These are the 3 steps. The first and foremost thing you need to do is hire your replacement and bring them in at your expense. It's an extra person on the show. I don't care if you have to eat their hotel room, their airfare, and everything else. Get them onto the job site. Okay, the customer has to see them doing the job, and before they'll pay for them. If you can convince your customer to pay for an extra person, that's great. I'm assuming they're paying for you. I'm making this broad assumption that the client's paying for you to be project manager. So get your replacement in there, and you need to be seen doing nothing. The client needs to see you doing nothing as often as possible. And whenever you can, defer to the replacement. So here's the new PM. You don't have to introduce them as a new PM. You say, I brought in a new lead to help me work on this show, and I don't know, let me go ask them. So do those three things and just keep repeating that. And then on the second show, be seen doing even less. Show up late to the load in, come in on the first show day or show up for the rehearsal. If you're the show caller, the person you need to hire is somebody who's better than you. I'm not saying that you're not a professional show caller, but you could hire a professional show caller and then everybody will see what the difference is. So find somebody who's better than you to come in and do that work. Once your clients start seeing you facilitating all these things, they see the quality of work that can be done without your direct intervention, then you can move on. Then you're going to miss a show, and then everything's going to go great. So that's how you get out of the field. You have to make those steps, but it first starts with that leap of faith of out of your own pocket, pay for your replacement to be on show site instead of chasing the money saying, well, I can't afford to hire somebody because I do the job myself so we can save money. You've got to get out of that mindset. That's not a business mindset. That's a fear mindset. So that's how you get out of the field. All right, now let's look at some questions. Nice mix of questions here. Okay, so the question is, what percentage of projection and screens are being replaced by LED walls for one-off events? All right, so technology question, but there's a business question behind here, so I want to answer the business question. The fact of the matter, it is changing. At my, for instance, at my Jumpstart events, my last event, I had a 50-foot wide LED wall with 2 different pixel depths, and I had 1 pixel depth for the content and another pixel depth for decor. And it was fantastic. It eliminates a lot of problems like room depth and having to have projectors either throw across the room or do rear projection. And in other parts of the world, LEDs have been replacing projection and screens for quite a while because we have very generously sized ballrooms in the U.S. compared to the rest of the world. So the rest of the world has embraced dense LED for a lot longer than we have. So I'm seeing that happening. I don't think it will ever, in the near future, completely replace projection and screens because they are somewhat practical, particularly at smaller events and lower budgets. But more and more, I'm seeing these on one-off events, and more the folks that I encounter have LED in their inventory specifically for indoor ballroom use. That's a very prevalent trend. I'd say probably 75% of the people I deal with that do video have LED as a frontline product. So that's definitely evolving. Good trend question. If you have any questions about the answers, feel free to put those questions in as well. Next question here is, thanks for, oh, somebody's thanking me for putting myself on the video screen earlier. Yep, I am a real person. I work out of my home office. And I do most of my webinars from here, but sometimes I'm in a client's office and I do it from there as well. But yes, if you want to see more of me, come to a Jumpstart workshop. You'll get more than your fill of Tom. Next question is, how should we pay salespeople? Base plus commission. All right, that's what I call a how long is a piece of string question, because there's lots and lots and lots of answers to this. I focus on the outcome you're trying to get. I ran a fantastic sales team. I think we had, I think up to 8 people while I was still there, and nobody was on commission, and it worked great. Their motivation was, their salary was commensurate with the volume of business they could handle. So the people who could handle, a whole bunch of mid-sized events and, do $1 million a year worth of business were worth X number of dollars, and somebody who could handle major events at $3.5 million worth of business was worth, well, more money in our business model. So at the very least, I want a base, and then how you do commissions and bonuses is really almost infinite. I do like team approach. I like the flexibility that salespeople will help each other out. They can write each other's quotes for them to help with capacity. They can field calls from the clients, so that folks can go on vacation. And if we just bonus the team for the overall productivity of the team, that's the kind of atmosphere that you can create. So a lot of it depends on the atmosphere that you're looking for. It also depends on whether you're paying people to develop business or maintain business. Now, let me go to the simple answer that's probably more of the question that you were asking. If I'm going to do a commission basis, the commission model that I typically use, and it's a variation on this, but this is 80% of most commission models on individual sales commissions. I have a base pay, which in our industry, I typically want to be 60 to 75% of their income, maybe even a little bit more. I don't want it to be so low that they run the risk of starving, which would cause them to move on. I want them to make a living wage and be able to make more money by maintaining a business, a certain amount of business. Then I want a commission that is a two-part commission. One part is on the gross profit that they control. The gross profit for most of you, the gross profit they can control is the amount of discount that they give. So if I can reduce the amount of discount I give, there's more commissionable gross profit. The second part of what I commission people on, and I call the gross profit commission a commission, and I call the next part a bonus, is I give them a bonus for top line, so for the revenue. So a typical program would look like this. The salesperson will make 2% of overall sales, right? So 2% of overall sales plus a share of the gross profit above a floor amount. So let's say our floor gross profit is 30%. Any gross profit above 30%, I might give 25% of that to the salesperson. So that would be a typical formula. Now that 30% floor may vary depending on the time of the year. It might be 40% on busy months. It might be 10% on slow months because I'm trying to encourage sales. So always remember when you're trying to incentivize something, make sure that what you're doing incentivizes the behavior or the outcomes that you actually intended. I've seen a lot of commission plans who are actually doing exactly the opposite of what they were intended. They were doing exactly what they were designed to do, but not what the owner intended for them to do. So everybody's situation is different and every business model is different. The simpler the commission, the more direct outcome that you can draw, typically the better results you're going to get. If you control what the salesman quotes and what profit margins are put in front of the customer, then you just need to commission on top line because the salesman has very little control over the bottom line or the gross profit. So keep those sort of things in mind. I hope that begins to answer your question because that's also a really deep question. And let me scroll down here. All right, so thanks, Sarah. So what are some of your thoughts on getting old clients to understand what they think is good enough is actually horrible in terms of audio video lighting? There's some phrases to say, not asking them to spend a lot more, but to have their events look more engaging. So let me paint what I think is probably a fairly typical scenario. You've had a long-time client. When they first hired you 10 years ago, it was a $15,000 project, and you've got them all the way up to $18,000 just by creeping some labor rates up. but they still think they're buying 10-year-old projectors. The first thing we need to do to help mitigate these kinds of situations is you've got to retire equipment. Just make it disappear. I know there are hoarders out there and there's owners out there that say, hey, the client's still running this projector, why should I not keep it? It's because you're cannibalizing more profitable work. So yeah, say, hey, the projector that we've used, these are obsolete now. And oh, by the way, let me show you how it looks compared to what you would get now, and do that A/B comparison. But you're going to have to drag them, maybe one product at a time, but drag them kicking and screaming forward. I worked with an account once where they got stuck in that doldrum, is that they had the brother-in-law deal, the owner deal, that they'd had for far too long, and it was actually it was costing us money to do their show because the pricing hadn't kept up. And what I first did was we recast the job into current technology and current pricing and showed them that their $15,000 job was really a $38,000 job, and said, I'm not going to try and get you there in 1 year, but I'm going to show you what $38,000 looks like. And can we agree that we're going to put in $5,000 a year more budget for the next 4 years and get you there? And that gets me fairly good buy-in. A/Bing solutions is great, but for some people, crap is good enough. So get rid of those products, eliminate them, take them out of service. They're too expensive to keep up. They're no longer available. And then sometimes you have to say, these aren't your clients anymore. They hired you 10 years ago. What you're doing now has evolved, and what they're looking for has not. And sometimes we just need to walk away from those folks. But let's give it a good try. Let's give it a shot, and try some of the things I just suggested. I hope that helps. And we're doing good time. I'm going to squeeze one more question in here, because all the person wrote down was cash flow. And there is so much pain behind that they couldn't even form a question. That's how I'm reading it anyway. So let me talk quickly about cash flow. Cash flow, it's one of the most painful things that you go through as owners and as businesses. As a consultant, it's actually one of the easiest things that we can help with and help you see your way through. If I have somebody who's struggling with cash flow, the first thing I look at is, one, are they making money? Because just because you're out of cash doesn't mean you're not making money. I want to see what's contributing it. A lack of profit will contribute to the lack of cash flow. So I want to see how much profit actually affects it. Most of the cash flow problems that I run to have more to do with discipline. We're not asking customers for money. We are afraid of customers. We're not getting deposits. We're not following up on our accounts receivable. We're not treating the transaction like a business transaction. We're in fear of the next transaction, and we don't want to do anything to upset the customer. If you're doing business with people who don't want to pay you, that's one problem. Your clients probably want to pay you. They're probably a little surprised that you aren't more diligent about asking for your money. So put your terms and conditions, make them very clear. Say, hey, it's a 50% deposit upon confirmation, and then here's the work that we will begin to do for you after that point. And you don't have to be a jerk about it, but you can enforce it, saying, hey, we're going to get started on the project, but you signed an agreement that said you would have 50% deposit paid at by this time. So please assure me that that is in process. Tell me what date it's going to arrive so that we can continue to move the work forward. So find the words and find the courage. And I rarely get salespeople to do this, because I don't want the salespeople to have a financial relationship with my customers. I want my financial people to have a relationship with my customers' financial people, and let them talk the language. This is a contract. We have an agreement. Okay? Now it's just business. And let the people who do business and use business language, because very often I mean, it's very rare that there's an actual disagreement about whether or not you deserve to be paid. What there often is a lack of urgency on the buyer's part or the individual who was supposed to pass it on. So you don't send an invoice to a person who can't write the check. You send an invoice to the accounting department and you copy the person who's going to approve it. So just put a few habits into what you do, and you'll make yay for 50% deposits. You got it. So get deposits and use your and run your company so that you don't need deposits to run your company. That's the other cash flow thing. And I got one last quick question here. Do I lease or buy company vehicles, trucks, or vans? Yes. It depends questions. Typically on vehicles, I prefer to lease. I want to treat it as an operating lease, so I can expense it. I like the support that I get from the leasing companies. If I lease from a Penske or somebody like that, the access to their truck yards, to replacement vehicles, favorable rates, the fact that they're very easy to sell back into that company or trade up if I do that, though there's really no reason we should ever do that because we never put enough miles on our trucks to actually warrant getting rid of them. But I am definitely a fan of leasing vehicles. I like to buy rental equipment. I like to buy my gear and lease things that are overhead. I was like, if I'm going to rent a building, why not rent a truck? But that's just, all of that is a personal preference. I can make an argument for just about anything. All right, so now I am officially out of time, but thank you, folks. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you got something out of it. I had a blast, and I appreciate the opportunity to take a break from creating new content and get to, well, talk about stuff that I get to talk about all the time with my clients. So now you got a piece of that. Quick call. Hey, before you leave, if you think I can help you, just go to my website or go to this Calendly link and set up an appointment, and let's just talk about what I do and what I do for you and see if we're a good fit. If we're a good fit, I've got a process to help you understand how I work and what it can do for you and where you can go with all that. But let's have that conversation. I'm really very accessible and I love talking about this stuff, so don't hesitate. You'd be surprised how much money I could probably make for you in a 20-minute phone call, and you never even have to hire me. But we won't get that opportunity to work together if we don't have that conversation. So please do that. Next month's webinar will be the year in review, the year ahead. Talk a little bit about where we've been, but I want to talk a lot about where we're going and what I'm seeing around the corner that you might need to pay attention to. Thanks again to all the sponsors. And then my closing thought is, all of you, I really encourage you to think about the outcomes that you want and then evaluate the tactics against that standard. So, if you're deciding whether or not you want to do something, think about the outcome and see if that's going to get you there. If you can't find a good match between the tactics and the outcome that you're trying to get, then just call me. I can help with this. This is what I do. There's no awards for doing it the hard way. Do it the easy way. Give me a shout. So thanks everybody for joining me today. You'll see the recording and an email tomorrow. Have a great rest of your week and a happy Thanksgiving next week in the U.S. Cheers.